Good morning. I welcome everyone joining us during this 15th annual North Carolina Black Summit. We're glad that you are joining us for this virtual experience. I am so pleased that in this virtual format, we have been able to deliver the same level of excellence and quality content as in years past. I am Senator Valerie Foushee, representing District 23, which includes Orange and Chatham counties, and I am honored to serve as chair of the North Carolina Black Alliance and moderator of today's legislative update session. As we have each year, we have to hear from our legislators, my colleagues in the General Assembly, about the issues and legislation before us as elected officials, but most importantly, these are the issues that are of note as either an opportunity or concern for our constituents and partners. Social justice, education, healthcare and health equity, economic inclusion and minority business participation, all of the issues for which we advocate and organize. Those are our commitments, so we want to not just simply discuss, but we want to be actively engaging in our communities. That's our ultimate purpose. So we are excited and appreciative of the leaders that have assembled for this panel discussion today. Our time is limited, so I will introduce our esteemed leaders, and I will start with the Legislative Black Caucus and House leadership so as not to show any favoritism to the Senate, the chamber in which I serve. The Honorable Kelly M. Alexander Jr., Chair of the Legislative Black Caucus, is a 7-term member of the North Carolina House of Representatives, serving the 107th District, hailing from Mecklenburg County. He is a committed leader on so many issues, not the least of which are those of civil rights, minority and small business, energy, and the environment. We are also joined by the Honorable Robert Reeves. I call him nephew, a 4-term member of the State House of Representatives and is the Democratic leader. He represents House District 54, which includes all of Chatham and part of Durham County. And last but certainly not least, my seatmate, the Honorable Milton F. Toby Fitz Jr., who represents District 4 of the State Senate, which includes Edgecombe, Halifax, and Wilson counties. He has a tremendous record of public service with 8 terms in the State House, 2 terms in the State Senate. His legislative career was interrupted only by his years as Superior Court judge. Thank you to each of you for being with us. And so let's jump right into our discussion. We're going to start with Chair Alexander. You are chair of what may be the largest Black caucus in the history of the caucus with 41 members. What is the agenda of the caucus for this legislative session, and how can the Black Alliance and other aligned organizations support the work of the caucus?
Well, thank you. One of the big things that we're doing is trying to make sure that the interest of the Black community are served by the next state budget. We're looking at things like beefing up the minority health, department, bureau, whatever they call it now. This pandemic has shown us that there are a lot of just inherent disparities, and that we've got to put some money into beefing up these things and making sure that as we have challenges in the future, that we don't fall back into that same kind of situation where our community is not being adequately, well, the information isn't adequately getting out, and we aren't motivating our people to understand that things like vaccination have to take place in order for us to be safe. Wear my other hat, I'm in the funeral business, and I can tell you that in Mecklenburg County, 30% of the deaths from COVID were in our community, and that's a very high percentage. And those are the kinds of things that we have to be cognizant of. Another thing is criminal justice system. Criminal justice system needs a tremendous amount of reform. There are a number of pieces of legislation that have been introduced that will piecemeal reform that system. We need to start looking at them from a coherent, holistic approach and start pushing some of these things. And because time is short, I'm going to shut up and let you talk to some of these other folk too.
Thank you for that. And that is a nice segue into my next question. So the prosecution and conviction of Derek Chauvin for murdering George Floyd does give a ray of hope in terms of law enforcement accountability. But we all know that there is more to be done in the areas of policing reforms. So Leader Reeves and Senator Fitch, we know the prospects of passing these bills into law are slim, but the issues are important. Can we talk for just a moment about the proposals of HB 532, the Criminal Justice Equity Act of 2021, and Senate Bill 656, Equity and Justice Act of 2021? Let's start with Leader Reeves. I think you may be muted.
I apologize for that, but thank you, Senator Pashi. What I would say is this, and there are tons of recommendations. These are the recommendations that came out of the governor's task force. The governor put together a task force during the summer that was led by Supreme Court Justice Anita Earl and Attorney General Josh Stein. Had lots of great representatives on there from different parts of our communities throughout the state. And so there are a ton of reforms to list. What I would like to concentrate on, if it's permissible, is the discussion about trying to get some of these things passed. The reform issues are clear. The decriminalization of marijuana, the changing in the way that police interact with suspects and people that they're trying to arrest and things of those sort. Those things I think are kind of obvious. What I think we've got to concentrate on when we're trying to get these issues passed into law are the hurdles that we run into with what we allow people to say that they're interested in and what they actually do. I think a bad habit that we've developed, and I've got a good friend of mine at ACLU that I would love to have come speak sometime, but she talks about it all the time, is that we allow some of our elected officials to come in and tell you that they support these measures. But then when it comes down to implementing the measures, they become the biggest roadblocks to Senator Fitch and Senator Fashi and Representative Alexander in trying to get these things passed. A lot of the issues that are brought up in 532 are issues that we've been talking about for 10 or 15 years. They're not new. We've got people like Senator Fitch, who's been in the justice system. We've got people like Representative Alexander, who has long pushed for criminal justice reform in the way that we prosecute our Black youth. So it's not a matter of the fact that we're getting new things. It's a matter of we've got to start holding people accountable and putting this at the top of our voting list. So those are my opinions there, and I'll pass it to Senator Fitch.
I think that Representative Reeves is absolutely correct. If I could say to you that all the proposals that are encapsulated in Senate Bill 300 or House Bill 532 or Senate Bill 656, all worthwhile goals, but they are not new. They're not new initiatives. But it is going to take more than reporting. That right today, the Standards Commission has a right to give certain qualifications for minimal training. And that's where I think we are woefully missing. It's not always that you have a bad officer who has committed offenses somewhere else coming to another place. But if that person does not have the basic training, it's not indoctrinated into sensitivity, you're going to have the same issue. But all of the publicity that we've had over the death of George Floyd, saying that he cannot breathe. One day after the jury spoke in Minnesota, In North Carolina, tragic situation occurred in Elizabeth City, where a person was killed by a police officer. Didn't appear, it doesn't appear to have been a situation that ought to have even occurred. But just one day apart, here we have the same thing to hit here. So we are not immune from whether or not we need reform. But our officers need a lot of mental health. It's a stressful job. We need to make sure that those who carry a gun and who have the authority have the ability to be able to make distinctions and differences with situations that occur. Somebody running away from you and they get shot just because a police officer doesn't make much sense to me. What threat is going on if they're running away? But we have to do more than just give the lip service to it. We have to really get in there and truly do reforms. Half of the crimes that we have on our books ought not to even be crimes. And so when we start thinking in and out of the box and using reasoning and common sense, we'll be able to reform our system. And a lot of people won't have to lose their lives because of foolishness.
Thank you both for that insight and for your work for criminal justice reform. Going to change directions right now to the pandemic. The pandemic impacts our communities. I mean, the way it has impacted our communities, it's just hard to put in words. Our children have missed crucial instructional time in school. Jobs have evaporated. Vaccines and health access through virtual doctor visits, but an issue is the need through all of these. The common thread continues to be broadband. So HB 196, which is the 2021 COVID-19 response and relief, is now law, and it was overwhelmingly bipartisan. So from each of you, what is next for our communities as we recover? Let's start with Chair Alexander.
For one thing, we have focused on infrastructure, of the cable itself going out in the rural areas, beefing up that in inner city areas. But I think that's only part of the problem. The thing that we haven't come to grips with is what happens if you don't have the money to be able to hook onto the cable? What happens if you don't have the ability to be able to pay for all of the services that that cable brings to you? We've got to start rethinking the extent to which access to broadband is a utility as opposed to an add-on extra service. If it's a utility, yeah, if it's a utility as opposed to a luxury, then there's certain things that we ought to just naturally do. It ought to be easy for counties and cities to subsidize the take-up, especially of poor people, especially of lower middle class folk, especially of anybody that's on that on the margin. Because truly today, if your kids can't do their lessons, if they can't interface with that broader world, then they are tremendously disadvantaged. And it's a disadvantage that the likes of which we have never seen before. I'm sitting here today in my living room, and this is my second meeting of the morning, and it's been a convergence of people from all over the state, and we've been talking about different things. Later on today, I'll interface with my son who is 7,000 miles away. And when you think about that, you now know that broadband, the access to it, is that door that opens up an entirely new world. Municipalities and counties ought to have the option of being able to do things just like they do with water and sewer. You know, you wouldn't think of living in Wilson or in any place in Orange County without having access to those basic services. Likewise, we can't think now of living anywhere in North Carolina without not only access, i.e., the piping, the cabling, or whatnot running near you, but you have to have an ability to tap on and to utilize that service. So that's the next big challenge.
Senator Fitch?
Well, I represent a rural area. I do not have the density that you might find in a Charlotte, Mecklenburg, or a Raleigh, Durham. And so broadband is a lifeline for us. The Constitution of North Carolina requires that all children should have an equal education. If you are facing lectures being given somewhere outside of your school for somebody who is a foremost authority in an area, and you are trying to sit in a classroom that either does not have, or if it does have, doesn't have sufficient, and you are constantly bumped off and cannot, the continuity of your learning and your education is not equal to the learning of someone in Mecklenburg. So I agree with Representative Alexander. It must be just like water, must be like electricity. While that appears to be new, it is not a new facet. There was a time that North Carolina and other places didn't have lights. You know, we went into Tennessee and Kentucky with the Tennessee Valley Authority before we had it in the rural areas of North Carolina. But that area, Tennessee, Kentucky, have prospered because they have become a true factor and a connection with the rest of our country. It was done originally with the mail system, the Pony Express ride. So if we can see the logical progression with what has happened in the past, and now our form of communication is by 5G and 4G and the internet, someone who does not have it is at a disadvantage. It is not enough to have a hotspot at the back end of the bus so a child could try to do.
Right.
It is not enough that a child has to go to a public library when the same lines run right by. Everybody today has a cell phone, but they don't have anything else. Some of us still have cell phones and landlines. I don't know what we're doing with the landlines, but we don't use it. Everybody walks today through communication with telecommunication by way of cellular devices. So if that is the way of the day, the new norm, then we must adjust. We must put our money to make sure that no child is left behind, that things that are necessary for both commerce and education. And then another thing, with this pandemic, we now are beginning to see a thing called telemedicine, which we never had to use before. Look how many people now don't have to get on a van or a bus to go see a doctor. The doctor comes right to you through your device. And so we will be much more healthier, which means we'll be much more prosperous when we stop the digital divide between the urban and the rural and give all of our citizens the same opportunity to compete and to be all that they can be.
Leader Reeves, I saved you for last because we have an ongoing conversation about broadband in our district. Take it away.
Thank you. And I would say, I mean, everything you've heard is correct. And actually, everything that you've heard is the reason that a representative form of government works well. And what I say is this: Representative Alexander's issue is not that they can't get the broadband. He's in Charlotte. His problem is people can't afford the service.
Yeah.
And Senator Fitch's problem is that he lives in the area. In fact, he lives in a very ironic area when it comes to broadband. I'll let him tell you about that at some point in time. His town of Wilson is the reason everything changed, and it should have been in a good way, but we took the legislature and did it in a bad way. But his problem is the same problem that we have, and Senator Fitch and I, that we've got folks that we're never going to have enough density where it makes sense for a private company to lay down the fiber. Never going to have it. I mean, where I live, in fact, I don't mind telling the folks on this, part of the reason we had to start late because of me, because I'm trying to get an email in. And if you live in Charlotte, that email comes like that. If you
That's
live
right.
in Chatham County, well,
Not so much.
exactly. It's like downloading on Napster back in the day. So with that being said, here's the thing. And again, this is again where we've got to let the rubber hit the road. We let people in leadership and our elected officials right now tell us that they can't figure out how to make it happen. And Senator Fitch hit it on the head. This is rural electrification. 10 years ago, whenever the Wilson Law was made, you know, people were like me. They wanted broadband because they wanted to be able to get their 4K TV and their Netflix. That's not the reality now. Now, the world is so different. Do you realize that Jeff Bezos could not have been born in Chatham County and started Amazon? Because his entire business was about being able to connect to people all over the world and help them sell their product. And he couldn't have done it. And that's insane. Think about the economic development we could have if we had universal broadband here in this state. Think about telemedicine. Senator Fashie and I have a constituent who is a specialist in his area. He lives in a $750,000 house. He has to drive an hour to go to the hospitals to do his specialty when he could do almost the entirety of his medical practice from his home if he had broadband. But even though he lives in the nicest neighborhood, has the best opportunities, he can't get access to broadband, and therefore it affects his practice. And if he didn't love the county so much, he just moved to another county, which causes our rural counties to lose good tax-paying citizens. So economically, it makes sense. Health-wise, it makes sense. And Lord knows, educationally, it makes sense. But we continue to allow people to tell us, well, you know, we can't do it right now. You know, we got to be careful about competition. You know, the government getting in competition with private businesses. Look, under the plans that I know that I would support, private business can make all the money it wants to. Because again, somebody who gets 200 megabytes is different than somebody who wants to get 1 terabyte. If you're serving a good product, you can still make all the money that you want to as a business, but the basic services have to be there for our people to be able to grow and to really be able to economically thrive. And so to me, it's a no-brainer. But again, it's one of those things we've got to move to the top of our voting list. When we spend all our time, and I'm talking about all of us, especially as African Americans, voting on social issues that we're told are the emergency of the day. We got bills running through that General Assembly right now that literally affect one person in the entire state, but they are taking up all of the air in the room when we got issues like this that affect millions of people and millions of dollars. And that is on us as voters. If we tell people that it's okay to keep concentrating on these issues that affect one person in the state, instead of getting issues done that we can get done in a bipartisan fashion that could help millions immediately and put money in our coffers immediately, then that's our fault. We can't get mad at anybody else. And broadband's got to be one of those issues. Thank you.
So this is our
Well,
plug.
Senator Foushee,
Sure, go ahead, Senator Fitch.
Senator Foushee, I was going to piggyback on what Robert said. Had it not been for the Wilson experience, and what the Wilson experience was, that we did not have good providers. And people in our rural area could be on one side of the street and they couldn't get a signal. And if you're on the other side of the street, you could get a signal. So what the city council in Wilson did was apply to the General Assembly for their own opportunity to be able to run. It was called Green Light. It's doing well today. It is other providers are there, Spectrum and all the rest of them are there. Time Warner is there. And it has not bothered in any way interstate commerce. And people are satisfied. Well, that same system allows all of those things that we've talked about, broadband would bring about. So there is no reason that we can't. If we can't, only because we say we can't. If we say we can and we push forward that way, then we will.
So this is our plug for voters to help us bring common sense and fairness to legislation moving forward so that there is equity in access to information.
And if we don't do it, no one will.
That's right. So moving on, so many of our partners and advocacy groups are going to be hyper-focused on the budget. The state's finances are stronger than expected, and we've talked about the need for recovery. What are the budget priorities that you all are hearing from our constituents? Let's start with Leader Reeves this time.
One of the big things I continue to hear about, and again, representing the rural area, is small business recovery, and making sure that we're taking care of the unemployed, taking care of small businesses, and getting money in there. Education is always a top priority, and it's something that I really, really think we've got to take seriously. And education isn't just raising teacher pay. It is raising administrative pay, it's getting community college pay back up, it's investing in schools, it's investing in infrastructure through bonds, and that's a big deal. Our infrastructure is going to be a big issue coming forward. The gas tax has been really exposed over the last year because nobody was going anywhere. And with electric cars and things like that coming in, we've got to figure out how to pay for better roads, along with buildings and things of that sort. And so those are issues. And then, of course, number one is getting healthcare coverage. One of the reasons that you got such a disparity with African Americans and how they've been affected by this virus, number one is the fact that we don't get the same healthcare. And we don't have the same opportunities for healthcare. And that's a very long, complicated issue. But one of the issues you've got to cover is getting some type of healthcare coverage. And so those are the things that folks are talking about in our county. But of course, you've got tons of other issues that are ahead.
Chair Alexander.
Well, one of the things that I hear all the time is, when is North Carolina going to legalize marijuana, either as an adult use or as medical use? And one of the reasons is that it's an industry. We've got African American folks in agriculture who could benefit from a change in the law. We've got entrepreneurs who want to get into a legal market. We've got research facilities all over the state that could be cutting edge of figuring out how marijuana and THC, which is an active component of it, can be utilized in alleviating pain and suffering. So that's a big thing. Criminal justice reform, people are always asking about various components of it. I've recently introduced a legislation that would outlaw no-knock warrants. We know that at least in one of these national cases, a young lady was killed because of a no-knock warrant. I don't think there's anybody on this panel or listening to this session that would want to wake up in the middle of the night with somebody bursting into their apartment or bursting into their home, yelling at them, who wouldn't initially think that they were being invaded, not by law enforcement, but by a criminal element. And if they had the ability to fight back, would do so. And it is from that dynamic that, no-knock warrants are extremely dangerous to the general population.
Senator Fitch.
Well, the needs in our community have not changed. We could put a comma behind the last agenda of the Black Caucus, the last issues that we faced in the General Assembly, put a comma there and start right back to where we left off. A mirror of things are affecting us in a fashion now that I don't exactly know how we want to handle it, because we have a difference of opinion between our houses. We have so much money this year, either because of the fact that we did not spend last year, and we don't quite know what is allocated to the different areas. I don't know when we're gonna finish here until we can understand what they're ready to spend. We have a philosophy in one house that says we don't want to spend any more money. We have another philosophy that says we have all this money now, let's do the things that we need to do for infrastructure, for pay for our teachers and our state employees. Let's give away some scholarships that ought to be. So until we can better healthcare, until we can kind of internally handle some of this particular infighting, the dialogue is going to continue to exist amongst our citizens. So just get active. While we're talking about the budget, the telephones here need to ring with what our interests are and what people think that we ought to be doing with all this money. We are coming out of, thanks to the grace of God, from a pandemic. And people have been shut up. Mental health is another issue. We've dismantled our mental health system for the most part, but people have been isolated for a year. What are we going to do about replenishing that part of our infrastructure so that the devastation that people have suffered for this year now be able to be addressed? So we just need to put our common sense caps on, look at how we're going to act and react to the issues that affect us, and keep an open mind without being willing always to say, no, we can't. Let's start saying, yes, we can.
So that takes me to another question, because part of your comment, Senator Fitch, was about the differences between the two chambers. So Chair Alexander, what do you see, or how do you see the Legislative Black Caucus working on spending priorities as that organization moves into influencing what is ultimately passed by the legislature?
Well, we've already met with the leadership of the Senate, and we presented to them some of our legislative priorities in economic development, in how to engage the interest of the Black community through the budget, supporting HBCUs, that kind of thing. Those priorities we also presented to the governor, so that some of that is reflected in the governor's budget, which comes in, I think, at about $29 billion. Some of them we are assured will be supported in whatever budget that the Senate eventually puts together. We'll see. On the House side, when that budget comes over to the House, we will be scrutinizing to see to what extent those priorities have survived, whether or not they are adequately addressed. And then we will continue to engage with our colleagues in the House to try to make sure that those priorities at an adequately funded level survive in the House's vision of the budget, so that when we eventually come to conference, we'll come to conference with components of what we are interested in both of these budgets, so that an eventual budget will still have some of the things that will directly benefit our interest in it. And because we have members in both chambers, and because we coordinate and talk to each other, I think our ability to influence this process is going to be greatly enhanced this biennium.
Thank you for that. This is a redistricting year. Representation for our community at every level of government is impacted by how our communities and voters are apportioned. Leader Reeves, you have had a line of sight on the redistricting reform issues in recent years. Where are those conversations now?
Well, but frankly, what I would just say is this, is that all of us hope for some redistricting reform. The reality is that without a change in leadership in the House or the Senate, I don't believe that we're looking at necessarily having a statute passed this year that would give us statutory redistricting reform, we'll say that. What I have heard is a pledge from the President Pro Tem of the Senate that they will at least try to follow the procedures that were done last year after the court order redistricting, which would be great. That would be much better than what we were looking at 2011. So I hope we are able to do that. With that being said, it's one of those things where, going back to your very first point, Senator Fashee, about things that we can do as the Black Alliance, things that we can do as Black elected officials. These are the kind of points you got to push out to our folks. Redistricting did not take the front lens in this last election. And I know with Trump and all that, a lot of air went out of the room. But if you're candid and honest, if you want government that actually represents you and government that actually works, two things you fix in all of our problems in government, just about. One, fair districts. Two, getting all this money out of here. Because we can take all the money that's in this meeting today and put it up, and it does not compare to some of the corporate interests that are running our elections. We've had some pretty candid discussions this week in our caucus, just talking about the money influence in elections and what that did this last election. So right now, we're hoping we get something with redistricting. We don't know, but at least if we can get as good a process as we had last time, I feel like that we're not looking at another 2011. And if I may add two things that I really want to add on to Senator Fitch's point, it's off subject, but I don't want to leave a room full of Black people without saying these things. One, Senator Fitch talked about letting us hear what you care about with the budget. Here's something else you can do with all of your constituents. Can you remind Black people that the tax money we're spending is your money too?
Yes.
There has become some kind of misperception that wealthy people who pay taxes are somehow more encumbered than the rest of us who have to work every day. And my thing is, your tax money is actually, to me, more valuable to us that work every day than it is to somebody wealthy. They're giving up disposable income to pay in taxes.
Right.
That's another car they can't get. You are giving up money that pays for your groceries, your schooling, your children's clothes, and necessities that you have every day to pay taxes. So let's not pretend that people who pay more taxes than us somehow have more say in the way those taxes are spent. That money needs to be spent on you. I'm kind of tired of hearing us act like that money needs to be spent on wealthier people. And the second thing I would say is, when we talk about criminal justice reform, and back to Senator Fitch talking about we need police reform, let me tell you another area we need some reform in is in our whole justice system. Senator Fitch will tell you, when he was a judge, there was one group that he couldn't do anything with. They decided what came in front of him. He could rule how he wanted. But if the district attorneys don't bring those cases, then there's nothing he can do to affect that. Your district attorneys matter. And we had a hearing this week on juvenile life. Juvenile life imprisonment is 85% of the juveniles that get life without parole are African American throughout this country. 90% of the juveniles in North Carolina are African American. And the District Attorney's Conference came in this year and upended that entire bipartisan agreement on trying to get something done on juvenile life without parole with no repercussions. And you've got to keep that in mind, that your district attorneys make a big difference with bad police officers, bad judgments, bad anything that's going on in your judicial system criminally. Your district attorneys can guide that. So please keep that in mind. But thank you for that sideway.
So thank you for that, nephew, because I believe if you hadn't gotten that out, your day was not going to go well.
It wasn't.
Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
So Senator Fitch, you're steeped in redistricting battles for many years. What advice do you have for advocates interested in impacting this process?
Well, first and foremost, I would say you must understand and know the Constitution of North Carolina. That Constitution says it is the responsibility, the duty, and the obligation of the legislative branch of government to draw these lines. Now, until our Constitution is changed, that is the way that it is. Now, I know people want committees appointed by this person and that person because they feel that the politics is going to be taken out of it. Whoever appoints has a has a political standpoint too. So if the governor is a Democrat, he's gonna probably appoint him some strong Democrats. If the Speaker of the House is a Republican, he's gonna appoint him some strong Republicans. That is what this legislative process is about compromise and making people work together whether they want to or not. But the public can get interested in the issue. They can attend all of the meetings at the General Assembly as they can, that start the redistricting process to help give criteria. They can make suggestions themselves. They can also draw maps themselves on the public terminal. The courts have said that the whole process now should be transparent. So you have to do it in the open in front of everybody else. The committee cannot do as they used to, go in the back room somewhere full of smoke and make a deal. So with all of that being, you must first understand what the process is. And you must demand of us that you don't just go and do something just for the political sake of it. Political gerrymandering is just as bad as any other gerrymandering, but I'm not going to tell you that in our system, that some gerrymandering is not going to happen. To the victor does go the spoils of war, but in those spoils, you have to do it in an organized fashion such that it can stand constitutional muster before the courts, because all these issues are going to go to the court to determine whether or not it was done rightly, fairly, and within the framework of the law.
And Chair Alexander, you have long worked on the issue of unlawful racial gerrymandering. What are your thoughts?
Well, one of my thoughts is that it's taken us a very, very long time to get the representation that we have in the General Assembly right now, 40 some minorities.
Mm-hmm.
And as we move forward, it would be my hope that our broader constituency pays attention to that and doesn't, and you know, you don't want districts diluted to the point that our representation, you know, goes way down. Yeah, we want strong alliances. We want to recognize that as the demographics of North Carolina changes, we're going to have to make room for some other ethnic representation. But as we do all of that, we need a very strong core of committed African American representatives. And that's one of the things that I believe is important. I think there's been a long struggle for us to have representation by us in the highest levels of government. And it's so, you know, in this very important kumbaya moment, I don't think we should lose sight of that.
All right, I like that. So in our remaining time, let's do a rapid fire. What issues or topics have we not discussed that you would want the Black Alliance, our school board leaders, municipal and county officials, community organizers, Black press, what issues would you all want to share that we have not talked today, but and because they may not be grabbing the headlines, but it's important for us to share as we wrap up this session.
North Carolina's Constitution still contains a literacy test, a provision which is stopped from enforcement right now. It needs to come out of the Constitution. A bill was introduced to do exactly that. It's had one committee hearing so far on the House side. It's got one other committee hearing to go through. You should be reaching out to your representatives, urging them to, number one, continue to have the hearings on the repeal legislation, and number two, to vote in favor of the repeal, because only if you take it out of the Constitution are you ensuring that that a literacy test can't come back into legal enforcement by a change in the federal government's interpretation.
Seatmate?
Well, I believe that the November 2020 election brought something to bear. America should understand that our democracy is very fragile. And we are fortunate to have survived the last 4 years. I myself hate to really figure and realize what would have happened if the election had gone different. We now have a living democracy, and we must keep it a living democracy. But 125 congresspersons, several from North Carolina, voted to overthrow the outcome of the presidential election. All because of a big lie that was being told, that people were misinformed and ended up believing it.
Yeah.
Some of my colleagues in the General Assembly even participated in the Stop the Steal rallies in DC and continued to spread those same lies to their constituents. This type of behavior is a clear and present danger to the existence of our democracy and our way of life. And it must be challenged at every turn. I urge you to let your elected representatives know how you feel about the matter. Let those businesses who you patronize know how you feel about the matter. And we must be vigilant and guard against voter suppression under any name that you want to give it.
Mm-hmm.
And what is most important, we must do all that we can to make Senate Bill 1 at the federal level in Congress pass, that act of 2021 and HR 4 pass. The Voting Rights Advancements Act in Congress all are more essential than what you can think. It's not just some written paper in Washington, D.C. for somebody to send down. If these bills do not pass, life as we know it in this country will not be what it has been. It will change. And I know we're going through new norms, but that's a norm that I don't want to see. And so I urge you to do all that you can do, be as others are, and that is participate in your government, because there is nothing any stronger than a strong local government, both at the local level, the state level, the federal level is just the cream on the ice. So we have to do those things that we used to do in order to make sure that our voices are heard. And we don't do it in a selfish fashion. We do it because it is good for this great country that we now call home.
Leader Reeves.
I can barely add to that. And that was going to be my thing, is just realize that the voting struggle just started. Don't think that getting Trump out of office meant anything, because at the same time that we elected the first Black senator from Georgia, the first Jewish senator from Georgia, their state legislature then went right back to work figuring out how to stop people from voting. And if you wonder why they wanted to overturn that election, I think Senator Fitch is being very kind. That it's not that I believe any of those folk believe that lie. It's because they have made a determination that there are people who should be in charge in this country and people who shouldn't. The National Review had an interesting article the other day that said, you know, maybe we should stop trying to figure out how to get everybody to vote. Maybe everybody shouldn't be voting. And to say a statement like that and feel comfortable is something. So what I would say to people is, remember, with all the changes and the reforms that we want to see, no house gets built without first putting down its foundation. And the foundation is voting. And then you build up on that foundation by getting in good elected officials. And then all of the rest of the things that you want are up at the roof. But we can't get anywhere without that start. And so we are now responsible. Back to what Senator Fitch is saying about, you know, we got to do what we used to do. When we were overcame a lot of these issues back in the late 60s, it's because we educated each other. We recognized that the public schools weren't going to do it. We recognized the media wasn't going to do it. We recognized the government wasn't going to do it. So we educated each other. And again, now we can't depend on CNN or anybody else to report that Josh Hawley thinks it's okay for there to be hate crimes against Asians. We can't do anything about saying Marjorie Greene, who everybody made a fuss about losing her committees, has now started the America First Caucus and has plenty of people in it. And don't think you're not going to get somebody in North Carolina in there. That's coming. So what my point is, we've got to educate our folks about what matters, or else we're going to be in worse shape than we were during that 4 years with Trump. And so that's my challenge to elected officials, is we should be doing, when we talk about Stacey Abrams, we speak with pride, and we should, but we forget what made Stacey great. Stacey could have run for Senate this year. And that's really what a lot of people want her to do. And I'd love to see her in Senate because she's a brilliant woman. She subsumed all of her personal goals to say the best thing that I can do for my state and my country is to get out here and get people that look like me educated, registered, and voting. And that's what we all need to do. Because if we're all voting, none of this stuff goes on. But when 81% of Republicans turned out in the 2020 election and 65% of Black people turned out, you can't make that make sense to me right now. And we've got to fix that.
So what you all have shared, you know, is pretty much to remind us that not only do we live in interesting times, but we live in critical times. Critical for our participation in the process, critical for our engagement to ensure that those whom we elect are indeed serving us. So it's clear to me that it is on us to work for us. So I want to thank all of you for your time and your insights today. The North Carolina Black Summit is certainly a place to come together and share information, but we know that your doors are open, and we thank you for that open door process, for being available for indeed your service to not only your constituents, but all of the citizens of the great state of North Carolina. Thank you all so much for participating.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Appreciate you having us.